just asked her what's been a main takeaway so far from the series of talks. No, it's for Sandra, Nat.
Yes, Sandra was not totally in part of this, so she may not be able to answer. She's a coordinator. So
okay, but she did say she had some epiphanies. So if you would share one with us, that would be great, Sandra. It can be anything. Doesn't have to be earth-shatteringly sort of whatever. It's just something that struck you so far from coordinating.
Yeah, maybe that I normally think that everybody has it all figured out, no?
Mm-hmm.
And sharing this journey, knowing that we are all walking together towards these questions and answers, and being together with more people, also going deeper into these deep questions of life. Makes me think that this is being human, no? Always trying to learn and to unlearn and sharing together this journey. Yeah.
Some very important points there. The illusion that everybody else has got it figured out, but we don't, I think is very common. But this thing about learning and unlearning is also very much key to it. Melina, I'm just looking on the screen here, and who's on my screen. Melina, have there been takeaways for you? Things that you've gone, oh.
From your screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So there is one person, and there is a forest. And forest is kind of life that we are trying to treasure, and we are looking for a right path that we want to go through. But somehow we know forest can be a lot of paths, small paths going to one goal or destination. So I see they are also harvesting activity from those two. So I would think that if we just live our life without harvesting anything or actually digesting anything from our life, it will go meaningless. I mean, the journey will go meaningless. So yeah, that's what my point of view.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That actually we need to be able to reflect on our lives, don't we, in order to create the meaning. That actually our job, a job of our consciousness and our becoming, is that reflective process, whatever that may be. So, Marnie, you're next on my screen. Can I ask you if there's been any main takeaways for you, and then I'll go to Aaron.
Main takeaways from our fellowship, Professor?
Yep. Yes, that's right.
Well, we shared this yesterday. If I would have to capitalize everything that we have gone through, our learning encounters, this would really be a disruption, because we have this narratives that were handed down to us that have shaped our lives, and some of those narratives are not really helping us out to our becoming as fully authentic and free human beings. So the learning encounters were disruptions in terms of how we think about things, how we behave, and how we interact with each other. So yeah, it's nothing but really disruptions to me, and there were a lot of skills that were shared on how we can reboot ourselves, to unlearn things and to relearn things, and to learn some more regarding ourselves and also about how things work in the world.
Thank you. That's really, I mean, saying that there have been lots of disruptions is what it tells me that the people who've organized this series of courses for you, series of talks, have been quite successful so far in upsetting and disturbing our comfort zone, you might say. And that's really important because, of course, the comfort zone only maintains what is now. It doesn't necessarily allow for deep and meaningful lifelong change and an ability to, what's the word? To embrace change as part of our life journey, that we don't want to be static. We don't want to be trapped within a narrative that doesn't serve us or serve the planet well, for that matter. So, Aaron, can we jump to you? So you came in a little late. I think you know what I'm asking, though, yes?
Yes, I do. Good morning, Prof. Bussey and fellow co-travelers. So far, yesterday was the most uncomfortable session. Generally, the whole journey for me has been one of unlearning, learning and relearning. I think before this, before joining the program, it was more of understanding the world. Now it's understanding the inner workings of my psyche. It's about connecting these two things. That's what I would say in short. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, the world is there simply because we construct it as there at some level, that there is that subjective objective interface that most of us don't even think about. And I think that's really important. Hom, you're next on my screen. It's nice to meet you. You came in late too, I think. So you know what I'm asking is just what have there been a takeaway from the course so far?
Good morning, Professor and Dr. Nath and everyone. Like to me, is that just to name a few, it is very difficult because like the whole 2 months journey were like really, really deep and profound. Just to summarize it, it is the process of like immersion, the process of immersion into myself to many, many layers, the unknown layer. And yesterday in the rebooting sections, I shared that like the words that like known potentials and unknown potentials. And I start to realize that when we talk about potential, it is not only the potential of being good, but also we have so many potential of to harm and, you know, like that's why like today's section is so like interesting for me, the challenge of being human. And this 2 months preparation made me realize that to be a real responsible and caring human being is not that easy, because we have gone through so many things in our life and the traumas or the collective trauma, generation trauma that brought along in our in my life journey. So this is one thing, and the other thing is that a little bit the beginning of the social immersions, and like our fellow here like are so close and feel like family. And when we listen to their journey, to their story, I start to feel so not only belong as a person or friends, but also belong their hardships. And I feel that connection in that sense.
Yes.
And then the process of like a variety of meditations. After experience some time, I even forgot that this is from different religions. I just start to feel so connected that, you know, like this is the part that can make me find myself deeper or calm myself. These are just in a short brief.
Well,
thank you.
You covered a lot of ground. I'm very impressed. Makes me wish I'd been taking the journey with you. But you know, one of the things I've been thinking quite a lot about is the ways that our narratives are actually shaped often by our trauma, you know, and that so the coloniality of all our worlds, none of us being based within the European sort of Anglo-American sort of diaspora, that, you know, we actually all carry in different ways. Even a white fellow like me from Australia carry the wounds of generational trauma and the violences that sort of sit behind all of that. So that's a very interesting point that you've just made there. And as for the rest, you know, like spirituality and meditation and spiritual traditions, an African-American liberation theologian, Cornel West, he points out that our traditions are our enabling. They enable us, or he calls them enabling traditions. And he says that without an enabling tradition, we are almost, you could say, naked, that somehow we are less than full. And that doesn't mean necessarily even religion as in a faith tradition, because Western secularism, atheism, they're all faith traditions too. We cannot escape somehow that dimension. So it's a very interesting thing you've mentioned there, Hong. So thank you very much for that. Hao, you're next on my screen. Is it Hao or Hao Kian? How do I address you?
How can, correct.
How can.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
My surname is Tan. Yeah, this is my middle name and then last name. Yep, thank you.
Cool.
Okay, for me, actually, I think quite similar with what Hom say, because as an educator, actually, that before joining this fellowship program, is that everything that just follow the system. When I start to realize that in one of the session that understanding. So it's like only I discovered that education is just a belief system. So a lot of us, especially me, how do I know the world? Is through just text or picture, but do I really experience it, practically? So all these things is that like what Dr. Nat, encouraging us that just see the thing in the deeper surface. It's not just the surface, but deeper layer. It's like we have to keep questioning rather than just absorbing. As the past education system is just that you just need to listen and just need to absorb it. But the thing is that throughout this program, it's more to like besides that, we also need to think deeper, or like try to find why is it so, rather than this is rather than just a fact. That's the thing that really make my shift, paradigm shift of my thinking.
Well, that's really big. I mean, I've been an educator all my working life, for 40 odd years now, and for me, it's helping students, but also colleagues, understand that education is not about information management. It's actually that critical capacity to think and reflect. There's more information than any of us can ever manage. So it's how do we navigate that? What are the values? What are the I guess also some of them simply techniques that we can use to navigate this amazing world universe that we inhabit in a way that's intelligible, but also in a way that enables us to keep growing and to keep moving forward. It's huge, isn't it? If I'm not wrong, Ray, I think you're the last person, and that's if I made a mistake and I've missed someone, can you let me know? Because I'm looking at sort of a subsection.
I think Ray is another one.
Ray is the last person, I think. So Ray, how is it going for you?
Good day, Prof. It's something that I'm yet to. It's a worthwhile struggle, I would say. There's nothing. I've come in disturbed, and I'm still disturbed. So nothing is really settling in, but that's okay. In the sense that meaning does not have to be forced. But I'm waiting on that. So
okay, I like that that you came in disturbed and you're still disturbed.
Yes.
Can you add to that at all? Because it's a very interesting concept. It's something that I relate to very, very much myself, actually.
Well, it's more of like Prof. Marcus. You see, I've been aside from me, it's really well. A lot of it is connected with work that just really opens my mind to both a lot of inspiring people and just a lot of injustices. And of course, the humbling reality of a physical body, of limited time, needing to discern, but of course also being intentional and disciplined, because you also have to put in time um for for meaning, for appreciation. So there. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, your answers have been as diverse as your faces are on my screen, and you know it's really an honor for me to join you, and I felt very appreciative of Nat's invitation to join as someone giving an offering to your ongoing journey. But you know, I've got an almost impossible task: the challenge of being human. When I started to really think about it, I thought I'm going to have to give you a very reduced response to that challenge. And of course, I want to, as an educator, create moments within my presentation for you as a group to reflect and engage with certain questions. So I'm going to share this PowerPoint with Nat after the session, and he can pass it on to you all. But you'll notice that there are tasks, 1, 2, 3, and 4. There are 4 tasks. And no doubt, probably at the end, there will be other tasks that, you know, we would all agree I could or should perhaps have included. But I wanted to tell you just a little bit about me first. Now, you know, I'm a person in my 60s. I was born and grew up in Australia. I spent a lot of time visiting and working, particularly in India, but also across Asia. I've worked in Singapore. I've worked in Taiwan, and you know, as I said, I've done a lot of engagement work in India itself. I feel myself to be a reasonably global citizen, but you know, I am deeply marked by 20th century cultural and civilizational conditioning, which I'm always working at undoing or addressing, engaging with. Being a white Australian, you know, I have inherited the legacy of violence, but I've also inherited the benefits of that legacy. We don't see, you know, very explicit violence against Indigenous Australians today, but my well-being and my good fortune today is premised on the suffering of generations of people and across, you know, a period of time from colonization from 1788 onwards. So I wanted to acknowledge that. I also want to acknowledge the fact that even though I'm not going to spend much time talking about it, and I'm a person who's meditated twice a day for 35 plus years now, you know, I've been a vegetarian for 40 years. I'm, you know, not necessarily your average Australian in some respects. I have a deeply, I think, informed view of the world that is spiritual in nature, but it sits often behind my presentations as a kind of sense-making tool. So I'm not going to talk about meditation. I'm not going to talk about spiritual philosophy directly, but what you'll hopefully gather from going through this next hour and a half process, whatever it is that I'm drawing on tools that deepen and problematize the material processes of the world as they are presented from a Western, what you would call, if you know the term hegemonic, that means, you know, controlling narrative, you know, that I'm seeking to find ways through that and beyond that to much more wholesome, you might say, much more healing ways of being and knowing and understanding both myself in the world as a wounded Anglo-Australian and as a wounded human being. I think, you know, that to be human is to carry wounds, not necessarily wounds as in, you know, massive burdens, but wounds that disable us in different ways. And I'm going to talk to some of that in this presentation. I also am aware that we have multiple forms of English being spoken today, and that English is, for many of you, probably not your mother tongue. If I say things, or if one of us says things, and you want us to restate that, to make it, to say it more slowly or whatever, do not feel at all shy about requesting for a restatement, because it's a courtesy for us as the speaker of the dominant language here, the English language here, in this context, to people who are doing an incredible job thinking really at a very abstract level as we are. So are you all clear on that one? I'm just going to open up the screen so I can see you all again, just to make sure that I've got it sort of, got it. Okay, I'm good. Great. So yeah, do not feel shy. I like being asked questions, and I love being asked to restate things myself. And I'm sure all of us will do the courtesy of doing the same. So having said all of that, let's move into this presentation then. So the first thing, this is what I said. I gave it to Nat and said, this is what I want to have a look at. The challenge to act in the world. I think when we think about, what does it mean to be human? We're saying, what does it mean to be an actor in this world as a human being? There are many actors in the world: the soil, the plants, the air, organic, inorganic. To me, we're all actors. But what does it mean to be a certain kind of actor? To make it, to make in some way, small or maybe grand changes to the world, make it a better place, okay? And this is really a challenge to us. So, as I say in the second little paragraph there, we struggle to be effective in the face of what's my purpose? Who am I? These questions can blunten our being in the world, okay? And, to me, looking at the curricula that Nat has put together for you, perhaps with Sandra's input, I'm not sure who was working with Nat, but, it's a curricula that Paulo Freire would call is about conscientization. It's about making us more conscious of who we are in the world. And some of your responses in my opening question speak to that. So what do I want to do? Well, in this talk, I want to look at existential barrier to action, something to do with limits. This suggests that limits are not what we think they are. And I've underlined this: the human spirit is in fact part of an evolutionary mechanism that is cosmic in nature. I want you to think really about that. Take that bit away with you. Perhaps there's something that Marcus has gone and said something. It makes half sense, but really I'm hoping to make it make more sense over this talk. But, I'm not a person who believes in answers rather than in challenges and responses. So these challenges and responses are, I'm inviting you to find your own response. And I'm hoping that, as I say there, that this makes you curious, and we'll see where we get to, hey? So what can we say? First of all, I think that being human involves a series of paradoxes. Human beings generally are fearful yet trusting. We can see this playing out in history. By the way, I never owned up to the fact that I teach history as well as future studies at my university, for instance. So I'm deeply indebted to the historical method. But, the way I see it is that culture tells us who we are. It protects us. It builds walls and cities and so on to keep the bad guys out. But it also it gives us the tools for trusting. We trust one another. And one of the things about conscientization is, can we trust the other? Can we trust that being which is outside the walls, whether it is nature or whether it is another group of human beings or whatever it might be? So that's for me, that's a primary paradox. I think it also, another paradox is that we are vulnerable, but we can also be very brave. I think, bravery is, people are not brave if they don't have something they can fear or that makes them insecure. I think we're brave in the face of our vulnerability. So when we try to make the world a better place, it can often come at a cost, whether the cost is financial or it could be physical. The war in the Ukraine is a good example of people who are being brave because they have to be brave, otherwise they'll be colonized again by a colonial, aggressive and violent power. So, how do we understand this? Well, it's part of the paradox of being human. I think, and this is where I think Hakan was talking about with his educational stuff particularly, is that we are conditioned, yet we are also creative. one of the primary functions, I think, of modern education is to condition us, to condition the body, to train us from a very young age to be still and subservient, to have a certain kind of relationship to authority, to the expert, to knowledge, and so on. Yet, despite all of that, human beings are deeply creative, have vast potential in terms of innovation, and in upsetting the apple cart, in actually disturbing the peace. I really think that disturbing the peace is very, very important, even if we don't know why we're doing it, to be honest. But we need to, the unlearning that a number of you have mentioned is linked to this challenging of conditioning, that we are conditioned beings by nature. Culture conditions us. And if you've traveled around the world, you'll be aware that culture has many different faces. And that, even in, let's say, if I just think about the European world, to go to France and then go to Sweden and then go to Great Britain, there are 3 different cultures. You can feel the different cultures, even though they share very similar assumptions about economics, about social order, about social justice, and so on. And the same is true if you visit India, then Sri Lanka, and then Myanmar, and then maybe down to Thailand or Malaysia. That there are similarities, but there are also things that make those cultures unique. So there's something else to think about in terms of conditioning. Human beings can also be cruel yet loving. If we take some, horrible person from history, we know that Adolf Hitler loved his family. He loved his mother, and his mother loved him. But, he was, the effects of his actions were cruel. And we can apply that to individuals that we know, probably ourselves as well at different times. So, these paradoxes are there to get us thinking. Now, what I would like you to do, please, and this is task 1 here, is I want you to spend 5 minutes. I'll pull up my phone to time you, to make a list of human qualities that you recognize, the good and the bad. Can you just pull up a piece of paper or pull up a Word thing on your computer and just type away for 5 minutes? I'm just going to grab my phone and I will time you. And at the end of that, then we're going to share that, what you come up with, and see where it takes us. So I'm just pulling up my phone now. So it's over to you. Anybody need me to restate what I'd like you to do before I hit start? You all clear? I want you to make a list of human qualities, the good and the bad, that you recognize. Off you go. Okay. So I'll just pull up my camera again. So that wasn't too hard, was it? You came up with a good list, everybody? Yeah. So who would like to share a couple of the qualities? I've got a task immediately following this one, and I'll go back to share screen in a moment. But yeah, somebody would like to share a few of the qualities of being human that you identify in your own reflections just then. Marnie, you raised your hand.
I can begin.
Yes, please.
Well, I've listed 7 sets of contrasting qualities. First, well, this is after watching the documentary Humans. I've realized that human beings has this huge capacity and ability to heal, but also such huge capacity also to be hostile with each other. And then we are very curious and adventurous as a species, but we are also very afraid and also very reserved. We are also very empathetic and driven, but we can also be very indifferent and jaded. We are also very innovative and creative, but we can also be very destructive. And then we long for togetherness and to be in a community, but we can also be very exclusionary and we marginalize a lot of people also. And then we celebrate diversity. We are so diverse with one another, but we also long for universality and for uniformity, and we are very suspicious of differences. And lastly, we long for peace, but we also use violence in order to achieve it. So
wow, what a great list. That was a fantastic list, Marnie. Thank you so much. Anybody feel brave enough to go after Marnie with her very awesome list? Anybody want to add something to that, please?
I can go next.
Thank you, Ray.
Yeah, thank you. Mine are free yet conflicted. Wounded healer. You have to be wounded in order to heal, sadly. And in order to heal others, I meant. So, biological, social yet cosmic. Inevitably connected across generations, and I'd like to use tribes. So, and constantly seeking this versus like the state of tiredness.
Fantastic list too. And really in both of your responses, you're capturing something essential about the nature of our humanity, which is there's a sort of restlessness that's sitting behind all of what you just described. And these questions have been at the heart of not just Western, but all world philosophies, you might say. I think that needs to be understood, that there are, whether we go to mythological stuff about the wounded healer, there are myths and legends from the West, but also from the non-West, let's say from India, that speak directly to such insights into the human condition. Anybody else want to add anything before I move to the next part of this same question? Actually, just one other person, maybe.
Yeah,
two other people. Okay, we'll go for two. We'll go for Aaron and for Hom. Okay.
Right. Okay,
who wants to go first?
Hom,
Aaron,
go first.
Go.
Okay, for me. Okay, pretentious yet insecure, sacred and profane. Selflessness versus selfishness. Hunters, but amongst ourselves we are prey to others. Barbaric yet saintly.
Good list. They're a good list. Barbaric yet saintly. I think that's really very interesting. Each one of the points that you've raised so far could be an entire session on its own. You're aware of that, aren't you? That each one is a vast set of not just assumptions, but there are histories to each one of these ideas. Each elements that you've given us. So Hom, what have you got to add to that?
Yeah, now I live in Sri Lanka, and so like every hours and hours are so painfully different, like evolving. So like thinking back, my home country in Myanmar and also in Sri Lanka right now, what is really happening is like the human being have such a very, very powerful and deep, like destructive nature, like the level of ignorance, ignorance on the human, like the other human pain and suffering, and also the greed and anger, cruelty, and very, very at the same time, I also witnessed with great inspirations that the human beings are so resilient and so courageous in like regardless of this like a huge cruelties and destructions, at the same time like very responsible and caring. So throughout this like two months of this fellowship journey, and I started to witness that like human beings have that very deep capacity of being and knowing, becoming. So this is what like our 2 months training is about, and it has really transformed my life. And I started to appreciate that how the other people, like they are a little moment of being has to be like support and nurture. And at the same time, human being has such like a seed and capacity to awaken in the sense that awaken within yourself and also awaken the things that around us. So that one, and so that's end up with like my hope that like regardless of whatever has happening or is happening around these two countries, I still have strong belief that human being has a huge capacity to vision and vision to heal and know self and around.
A beautiful reflection, but also I'm a person who believes that everything happens according to some kind of plan. So my plan was to ask people to reflect on their own experiences, and you've already done that, Hom, by talking about being in Sri Lanka now and what you're observing. Because if I go to share screen again, where is it? Oh, there it is. So what I want to do from here is to get people to think about life experiences in terms of how they have fostered the views of human nature that you have all listed. So we got, I think, 4 of you out of the 7 or so who gave us, your takes. So if I go back to Marnie, I think first, you said you'd watched the documentary Human and that you'd come up with a list of these paradoxes and so on. So our life experiences, though, aren't just recent, like I've just watched this, or yours, Hom, where you're in Sri Lanka now and for the last couple of months or however long you've been there, you've been observing these sorts of things. Our life experiences are all those things that add to the sum of who we are now. And, there's that old, rather quaint cliche, you could almost say, is your cup half full or half empty? We have certain psychological ways of viewing the world and viewing reality that are essentially built in and often reaffirmed on a daily or weekly basis. Yes, I knew I couldn't trust people. Every time I trust people, they let me down. Or, it's amazing. Every time I trust someone, they rise to the occasion. We can have these different stories, right? Are you all following me? Yep, I'm looking here. I'm looking at everybody. Okay, great. So what I'd like you to do is to reflect just for a moment on some early life experiences or life experiences that have been really reasonably formative. I'll give you an example. So for me, my life has been, quite blessed. I'm luckily born in a country that doesn't experience the kind of poverty and violence that, let's say, Sri Lanka has experienced, especially since the Civil War and so on, or Myanmar. I'm looking at you, Hom, because you're right in the middle of my screen here, so you're my point of reference right now. But, I went to through a period of schooling that was really incredibly violent. We were beaten by psychotic, teachers. It was also, interestingly enough, a school that was run by, Roman Catholics. And so I grew up with this kind of weird split in my mind between my innate spiritual feelings and my deep Christian sort of enculturation, and yet I saw the ugly side also. So this has led to me seeing things always usually as a binary. Now I've been trying for the last 20 years or so to break down binary thinking, because I see, we just come up with binary lists of paradoxes, but at the same time, I think there's a third space in between where we actually make choices. Okay, and that's where we actually can sit. So my own personal history, I've just given you an example. I'd like you to think, and they could be quite intimate and you don't have to share them. I want you to reflect on how your own personal histories, your own personal biographies inform some of your deep assumptions about reality today, whether it's political reality, economic, personal, social, individual. I don't want to sort of lay down, what would we call, any rules about where you think, but it's part of this ongoing journey of we cannot unlearn unless we can actually identify sources that sort of sets us up for the kind of optimism, pessimism, whatever it is, stoicism that we have in our lives today. Am I making sense to people? Do you understand what I'm asking you to do? Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to give you a few minutes to reflect on that, and then I'll invite people to share if you want to, like I shared. But we don't need you. I'm not going to force anybody to share, because it might be quite a personal and painful memory that you've had to acknowledge, but you don't necessarily want to bring it into the public sphere. Okay, so I'll put my timer on again for 5 minutes. I will let you sit with that and really dig down as far as you can, okay? And I will turn my screen off like I did before, and I'll be back in 5 minutes. Okay. Let's pull that back, close that down. So, did anybody have any trouble finding a couple of life experiences that have informed your own worldviews today? You can just do a thumbs up. You don't have to necessarily answer spoken wise. Okay, yep, cool. Now, just before I ask anybody if you want to reflect on anything, this goes to my deep feeling that, our choices when we start to theorize the world around us, especially academic, is that our theorizing is based on life experience. That there is an intimacy to theory that is often denied in the academic world. We need to understand that biography informs the way people function, academics, scholars, whatever we want to call them, function. And that one of the things we've been very clever at doing, because we're clever creatures, clever human beings, is in pretending that theory is divorced from life experience, when in actual fact, it grows out of life experience. I think it's very hard, if you have not experienced gender violence, to be a really diligent feminist, for instance. I think it's very hard, if you haven't experienced coloniality, to be a good post-colonial theorist or historian or whatever we might want to call it. And so on. We could say that about gay, queer, lesbian, we could say it also about Indigenous and so on. I think what I do, I find, let's say, I read feminist literature and feminist critique. I learn from it. I learn how to take those tools into my own life experience. I don't try and speak on behalf of women because, of course, I'm not one. And that can be true for Indigenous people, or it can be true also for, and this is something that there's been an interesting silence in our reflections so far. It's a silence around the more than human world that we inhabit. That we can't be human beings without birds and flowers and trees and grass and dirt and bacteria and so on. That we actually need to be mindful of the fact that we exist in, and our human beingness is dependent on, or even contingent upon, there being a world out there of that follows laws and functions and flows similar to what we might follow in our internal systems, in our biophysical systems, but also our psychological, emotional, and even spiritual systems. I think we need to be aware of that. But I really want to underline, and that's one of the reasons why I don't know whether you get time to do the readings, but I sent along that reading that We Shall Rise. It was about intimate theory. And, in it, you get a good sense of who I am, because I use my own voice often in that particular paper, but also that my key assumption is that you theorize, we all make sense of the world through our own biographical lenses. Okay, so that's the background to this question. So I'm going to be quiet, and I'm going to ask, is there anybody here who would like to throw some light on your thoughts so far, and where you got up to when I interrupted you with my timer saying 5 minutes is up, and and everything. So to remind you again that the question we're looking at is, what life experiences have fostered this view of human nature? And of course, it implies in you. Okay. So anybody want to have a go at responding to that? A resounding silence. Oh, good, Ray, you're going to say something. I was about to say, okay, it looks like no one wants to.
I actually would rather go after, but just for the time. Looking forward to others later. One is just want to share, hopefully, two short what we call this paradoxes. The one that I've shared about free yet conflicted. I tie this to my mother, who has never limited me, and so I kept on exploring only to find myself conflicted with all the paradoxes and, the call to discernment, prayer, and action. Because if you explore a lot, you get to be troubled a bit too much. So that's one thing. The second thing that by constantly seeking it versus being tired. So my past as a bullied kid or child, I tie it to this because um this past of being constantly bullied really and standing up in certain times that I can, in the best way possible. It really built my determination to move forward, but never to settle down and take my time. I was always having the thought that, I'll graduate soon, I'll get done with school. There are so many other things. It's always like that. I never settle. So it also built in me a strong sense of empathy and my fear of indifference. I am very two things. I am afraid of zealots, those who are radical in terms of thinking that they are righteous, knowing what's best, and then those who are too apathetic. I'd rather always take the risk to try despite my tiredness and fear. So I might not be 100%, but I always try because I remember when others did not take the risk to be kind to me. So it was just so hard. The bullies were one thing, but the silent majority, that was the killer for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
There.
Thank you. That's very powerful. So thank you very much for sharing that. Yeah. Wow. Anybody else want to add anything at this stage? And again, there's no need to. Someone put something in the chat. It just came down and said, what does it say? Thanks for sharing. Oh, that's Sandra. Sorry. Yes, you got one fan, Ray. Well, you probably got a whole bunch of fans here. I'm a fan. I'll put my hand up as a fan straight away.
I will go
Okay.
next.
Oh, you will. Thank you, Amalia.
Okay, I would like to share two experiences. So the very first one is I grew up being taught to be independent. So basically what my parents did was when I have a problem, they will not offer a help. So the only sentence that keep being said was, if this is your problem, please find your own solution. So you're gonna make up whatever you have done. So basically, if I have issue at school, if I have issue for anything, even though I remember that I involved in an accident, I actually crashed into someone. But then I called my father and he said that, oh, now you settle it yourself. Okay, but then my mother came. When I hugged her, she was so blank and didn't say anything to me. So from that moment, I mean, when I grew up, I actually grew up not asking for help. So I've been so used to solve my own problem. Like even though it was hard for you, but you're gonna make it out or you're gonna work it out. So what I view from people nowadays, people around me after I grew up, I see the capability of us to actually not to become so dependent on others. But I see that the idea of seeking help when you need help. So I learned it in a very hard way in university when I go out mingling with people, to be surrounded with people. I learned in a very hard way to ask for help. Yeah. So luckily, I'm still the one who wants to do things on my own. But then there are a few people who are so loving, and I don't know, I owe them a lot that they keep offering me help. So this is the way that I open up my mind a bit by bit to actually seek help and not to be so hard on myself. So this is what's happening. And the second one is during my school time. So there was a group. There were few groups of students some students are very religious, like they wear a very long hijab and everything, but the others are somehow liberal and everything. But in my point of view, when I grew up, I mean, of course, my family is not that religious, but they are holding up to their religion. So we are the practical Muslim. And of course, during my very first time in school, like boarding school, I was involved with the group of the religious one. But one thing about being too religious, we thought that this group thought that they are so good of others. I mean, they are better than others. They are the best. So when they do really do friends, good friends, having good relationship with the ones who have less knowledge about religion. So they judge others. You should not join us. We cannot be friends with them. You're gonna go to hell. So this is what happening between these groups of religions, I would say. But when I get to know people, the one who we are seeing as liberal is not actually they wanted to. It's just that they don't have the privilege, they don't have the knowledge of religion that make them who they are. So I learned from that. So I did my degree in Islamic University. So there are the same circle as well. So there are few groups of religion, and they keep differentiate people from your knowledge of about religion. So here, but then from here, I started to be accepting of people. I mean, even though you don't wear the same way as I am, you are still worth to be my friends. So you are still worth to be my group mate. So that's the thing that built my, I mean, the struggle that I understand from people that we see different than us, that what makes me become accepting of others. Not just we can be accepting, but at the same time we can hold strong to our belief as well. So yeah, that's from my point of view. Thank you.
It's a beautiful way of describing holding your sense of self, but also avoiding what's called relativism, where anything goes, where everything is fine, because not everything should go, and nor should everything be fine. So I think that's really interesting, the way your life has navigated you to that point, Amelina. So that's really good. Anybody else want to add before I move on?
Yeah.
Is there anything else that we?
Yeah. Yeah. I'd like to share about. Okay. I'll go first. Okay.
I can, and then go home. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Living in Malaysia, technically, that we were thought to, it's like the systems itself that already like trying to divide by races. Yeah, to be honest, since young that my parents that keep telling me you cannot marry with other people that other than your religion, especially Islam, because you have to convert, then you cannot, it's no turning back. Something like this. So that type of stereotyping and also grown up in this Malaysia system, politics system, where they always use the racist card in order to win in the election. It's like completely divide us into three, not three, it's like many groups. But the recent cases that happened in Malaysia, where we had this the flood, the worst ever flood near my place as well. So when I go to the front, to help up the community, to engage with the community to help out, I noticed that it's not divided that way. You see, so in a way that all came out to help regardless who you are. But the thing is that it's only the government that you're trying to do something like that, but not the Malaysian. So that's why that slowly when we're trying to jump out from the box that which created by the system, saying that you can only be like this, like that. So this unfortunately that this has certain impact to the group of the people where they will still think that way rather than, you know, we can be unite together as a Malaysian rather than Malay, Chinese, India. These are the three main races in Malaysia. So that's why that, you know, as an educator myself, that, you know, I always telling that regardless who are the student is, so who are they are, you know, what coming from what races or coming from, because I'm teaching in international school as well, that, you know, which country they're coming from, you know, it's still the same. We are human beings. We are global citizens. We are living in this earth. There is no boundary, like, you know, to divide this and that. But yeah, this is something that, you know, my life experience about it since I was born in Malaysia. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And it's a really powerful insight. For me, it comes down to that saying, the conditio humana, the human condition. So when you're talking about floods, and we've had a lot of things like that happening in Australia just recently too, people will come out and help one another no matter who they are. Doesn't matter what skin color, what religion, whatever. It's, you know, people just help when they see need. I think this is part of the human paradox that we were talking about earlier. Hom, you next.
Yes, this exercise is so helpful for me, because I started to write down from the baby age until now, and I need more time for that. And one thing that I understand better on the things that I'm drawn to, on the things that I'm working. So, like, for example, one thing is that, like, I grown up in a war-affected regions. So, like, I experienced and also I witnessed a lot of, like, poverties and a lot of violence, not only around the war, but also the violence within the families and the school context, right? So for that, like, now, like, the area that I'm so drawn to and I'm working a lot is, like, in the child protections and, like, gender-based violence and such, right? So this is one thing. But the other layer that I started to see myself is through the embodiment process that we are going through this month, and also through my the practice of Vipassana, is that, like, I start to realize that even though, like there are some layer behind the work that I'm doing. For example, because I come out from the war-affected region, I witness those things. That's why I want to go back and serve the region. So this is, like, very superficial, but, like, the deep questions that Dr. Nath trained us to ask help me to understand that what am I trying to run away from this? What you know, like, because, like, I start to see some, like, unhealed layer of trauma inside me. And when I see, like, abusive, like a child being bullied or abusive, you know, I just want to very quickly go and help or do something. But actually, in a very deeper level, because I can't like experience, or I can't face this one again, you know, like this trauma again. And I try to run away from it. So that's why I start to realize that even though the work that I'm doing in the peace work, like, we are doing with a lot of agitation, anger, frustration, we are motivated with anger. Actually, we don't, like, it. This one prevent us to see a very deeper level, the root cause of the problem. We can't bear the symptom, and we just want to resolve the symptom very, very quickly, rather than going down to the deeper level. And then the other thing is what kind of, like, what kind of attitudes and, like, a motivation I'm doing. Am I motivated with a deep compassion and wisdom, or am I motivated with anger that I have experienced many decades ago? So, like, yeah, this thought came in and helped me to understand better. It is not about what the work you are doing, but it is about how are you doing it, right? So that one, and I start to experience, I start to feel that so many unhealed wound and trauma in me, even doing in the good work.
Yeah, that's really profound. And one of the things that really comes out of what your story of your experience of trauma and anger and resistance is that we often resist, but we don't know what to put in the place of what we're resisting. We don't know how to foster a culture of peace, a culture of equity, a culture of justice, and so on. Because all our energy goes in the anger. It goes towards the resisting. So to me, and this is what I think is quite important about a program like this, is that it invites us to start thinking about alternatives. It's not just that we resist gender violence, for instance, but what's the alternative? What does a partnership society look like? What could it look like? What kind of values? What kind of humanity is called for or required of us? What are the technologies? Some of them are no doubt social technologies that are already present. Social technologies, I mean not just a justice system that has better laws. I mean religion and faith that have models of being religious that aren't like what Amelina was describing, where you get the zealot, that person who stands up the front and says, I'm better than everybody else because I'm more religious than everybody else, or whatever. But, how do we foster cultural forms or systems? We're going to come to that a little bit later. But, this is a key question for social change. Social change doesn't grow out of resistance. We've seen many times new dictatorships emerge out of old dictatorships. We resist, and what do we come up with? Well, our imagination is so exhausted by resisting that we actually can't see where we could be, where we might go in a future that is better than today. It's a really profound question. I'm aware of time. Is there anybody else who wants to add something to this before I move on? Or we can come back to it, perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay.
Professor Marcus, I'd like to share about my own experience also in terms of the conflict between celebrating diversity versus wanting to be uniform and to be universal with everything.
Sure.
I think I'd like to bring up some concerns regarding on gender, since well, I have been teaching for 12 years, and much of those years are really teaching in primary school, in basic education, and the usual narrative that I share to my students in terms of gender is really on complementarity, that men are really meant for women and women are really meant for men. And I've seen also that struggle from my students who are not in that category of being straight woman or straight men, and I've also seen I've seen their struggle, and also of wanting to belong to this community, to belong to the Catholic religion, and yet they are being marginalized, and they are being outcasted because of their gender. And there's also a personal experience of seeing also the struggle of my cousins and also of my friends who are not in that binary classification of gender. So that's it. That's a struggle also of remaining faithful with the doctrines of the church, but also questioning and critiquing that narrative, that complementarity narrative regarding gender, and even regarding love, of limiting love to between man and woman alone.
Yep.
So,
wow. I mean, that's an enormous domain and it's also a very risky domain. For some people, it's a very risky domain. It's also very painful. But, this question of doctrine, and, the role that dogma can play in shaping our realities, we need to be aware that it doesn't just come out of, let's say, the church or the Catholic Church, that, every culture has its own foundational dogmas, you could say. And that's because historically they have evolved in terms of a worldview that has been generally patriarchal, simply because organised social forms have been, for probably up to 5,000 years roughly, patriarchal, with some exceptions, but the exceptions are relatively fleeting from my perspective, is what I've studied in terms of history. But, you know, what we're dealing with here, Marnie, is the question of categories and the way that our minds are encultured into thinking in terms of categories. And categories are a bit like what Amelina was describing earlier, and, you know, are related to how do we make sense of the world, especially of a world that is unsure, insecure, so that we can also still feel good about ourselves. One of the things about vulnerability is self-worth. So self-worth, in a world that's reasonably degraded in terms of self-worth, if you're going to be a Muslim woman, for instance, then you're going to be the best Muslim woman. You're going to, you know, have the longest hijab. You're going to go and you're going to pray X number of times a day. You're going to do X, Y, and Z. Okay. And of course, we are all aware of traditions in which the external assessment of what is good or effective or true is there to be measured. But the internal worth or value of that may be far away from what is being described in the external world. So that you've raised a massive question there, Marnie, and I can't answer it. I'm just reflecting on it in terms of especially the intimate theory that's involved here. As you make sense of your world, you're teaching, but you're also studying. You said from memory, you said you're studying theology and so on. As we make sense of our world through a lens like theology, of course, there's theology and theologies. There are so many different, even just within the Catholic domain, and it's a really rich domain. I have books floating around me, which are written by Catholics of various different complexions. Well, not just Catholics too, you know, Baptists like Cornel West is some kind of Baptist and so on, you know, and I visit these people because they enrich my own thinking by questioning categories. Categories like simple categories, like, I mean, not, are they simple? Like the concept of grace or the concept of prayer, you know, and so on. What does it mean to pray? Is a question we could ask ourselves in the context here of this. Are we praying because we want something? Dear God, I want to pass my exam tomorrow. I didn't study, but please God, help me pass my exam. You know, are we praying for things, or are we praying in a way that is almost like abiding with, in that Vipassana sense? Who mentioned Vipassana? I think it was Hom. Was it you who mentioned Vipassana? So are we just being in the company of, you could say, or however we want to frame it? These are very deep questions, not to be answered in anything like that, but the challenge of being human is the challenge of seeing how do we respond when categories of violence emerge, categories that separate us from others. How do we respond to be the best kind of human? If you're challenged by someone who is non-binary sexually, okay, if that challenges you, how do we open up our heart to put aside our fear and our own, presumably often it's the case that we recognize in ourselves elements of what we are witnessing in somebody else that we do not want to acknowledge. So are we discerning? How do we discern? We project, you could say, our wound onto another or onto others. So, you know, there are no, and we don't need answers, actually, Marnie. What we need is healthy responses to these questions. So, and of course, we need to build the best in human. So a number of you, I think, are educators, are in that sort of role. When we are educating, it's not about giving information. It's more about empowering people to feel, one, good about themselves, and two, so that they feel good enough about themselves without taking away the good in others. That's a really important thing. So in an old Western style, if you can answer more questions than everybody else, you're probably the teacher's pet. You're up the front. So you get a good that way, and you demonstrate how, you know, you're better than everybody else who's behind you in the classroom, you know, who can't answer so many questions. But that's an anorexic way of seeing the world and an anorexic way of being a human being. Sorry, you're pulling your face at me, Sandra. But, you know, to me, it is this is what it's about. We do live in anorexic cultures, those cultures which are so starved of deep wisdom and deep self-love, for a start. If you have self-love, you're not going to be worried about trying to be better than anybody else. So the bullies that you experience, Ray, are the most, now as an adult, you can probably feel compassion for them. You might not, because they might have been really bad, but it's to feel compassion for the bully, because they are really vulnerable. They're scared. They're terrified of being discovered and being challenged. I'd love to know, in a sense, maybe I wouldn't actually, but I do think, because I've followed world events like everybody else, what is Putin going through with his grand plan falling to pieces around him? An arch bully who's bullied everybody into that position we're in now, and yet it's not happening the way he wants. And there's, I don't know what you see, but in my sort of circle, what we would call my echo chamber, I see a bunch of stuff about Putin's fear, his paranoia. He's scared of being found out, you might say. And I think that can be said about bullies. But, if we step one back and we go back to this question, and I need to keep moving because I'm aware that, well, I never really necessarily expected that we'd get through everything anyway, but I thought we might get somewhere close. This is such an important question. I just have to come down. There we go. So what are our life experiences? So we're thinking about life experiences. Some of us are educated, some of us are maybe members of NGOs and so on. But what we have to understand is that as we venture further into this question of what is the challenge of being human, the deeper questions about how we think and how those thinkings, those assumptions have been shaped by our cultural and life experiences, we need to acknowledge that and own up to that and start exploring that further. So I'm going to move on now and see where I was. Oh, that's right. So this is quite simply the list of stimulus material that I gave to Nat when he invited me to come along. I invite you, if you haven't looked at it, to look at this question about beyond words. I think a lot about words. I love words, but I also know that they're our own worst enemy in some respects. This question here is, this article, the first one, is a question about COVID. I don't know whether you've read them or not. And here we have this reflection I have on the role that our emotional states have in our form of rationality. So, when I think, for instance, about Amelina's story, Nat, I'll come to you and just finish this thought first. Yeah. When I'm thinking about Amelina talking about being at an Islamic university and the different kinds of friends and so on, and how they measured one another against one another according to what they, how good they were in terms of being Islamic or Muslim women, right? If we think about that, we can understand the way they link their emotional, or what I would call in a very philosophical sense, their affective states or their subjective states, and align it with a form of reasoning that allows them to then prioritize or give themselves power over or power beyond others as a result. So I'll come to you, Nat. Sorry, what do you want to?
No, nothing. Just to say that these materials that you have sent to me, I would send them after I held back that until I wanted you to finish this session. Then they would see a lot of relevance in looking at, because they have been given a lot of materials.
Sure.
So it will be sent to them. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. So yeah. All right. So you'll have the. I invite you to engage with that material. The first article is reasonably short. The second one is even shorter. It's almost a blog post. The YouTube clip is only 15 minutes long. And the longer chapter, We Shall Rise, which is the shared reading, is longer, and I wouldn't necessarily try and read it all. You might want to read the first few paragraphs and leave it at that. It's very much up to you, but it's there as a gifting to you guys, basically. So I will keep on moving. All right. So for me then, what we've been engaging in is Freirean conscientization. We've been looking at consciousness as navigating paradox. When we've got the good and the bad, the male and the female, the religious and the non-religious, the secular and the sacred, all those sorts of categories. But it's also, I think we need to make it clear that consciousness itself is a sense-making tool that is continually evolving. And I'm going to come back to that later. So I'm telling you now where I stand in terms of all of this. And I stand in a body. And I really like this little graphic here, knowledge and experience, because a guy writing a long time ago, even when I was a kid, Alan Watts, and you can find some very interesting YouTube clips of this fellow. He's sort of like a Western Buddhist in a sense, I guess is the best way of describing him. But he was an anarchic Buddhist. he wanted to throw everything out and question absolutely everything. And he said, we don't need a new religion or a new Bible. What we need is a new experience. Now, I invite you to think about that and to take that away with you. We need a new experience. I wanted to highlight it, but I can't because I'm in SlideShare. So this new experience, what is a new experience? Well, for a start, we have to say that given where we are in the 21st century, with COVID, with pandemics and so on, everybody is having a new experience. And it's challenging what it means to be I. So when we think about flooding in our local area and going out and helping, that means that we're actually putting aside categories that separated me from the other and exercising or practicing being a new kind of I, a new kind of individual in that context. So the challenge is to actually grasp hold of a new experience, but to hold on to it. Don't let it go. And ask yourself on a regular basis, what new experiences are you having? A very profound experience is one of becoming a parent, for instance. And now, to become a parent, I actually have had a bunch of stepchildren, but I didn't become a parent until my early 40s. And immediately I felt I'm more vulnerable now. This little being, this babe here, has made me more vulnerable. And I had to think a long time about why that was the case. It's a new opportunity to love in a different way. But, it was more than anything this question of, okay, here is this child that's totally dependent on me. Now, and having been a step parent before that, I was able to contrast the level at which it felt the same and at which it felt different. For me personally, and I know it can be very different for different people, there was not a lot of difference there. What I discovered was that actually, even as a teacher, my students made me vulnerable, because my students were beings that I was engaging with, not as adult and child or expert and non-expert, but quite simply as one human being with another. And I think for me, that new experience, let's say, of parenthood is just a very good example. But it can be going to another country, like Hom has done, moving from country to country. And I think many of us have probably experienced that, or going to a new institution, a new job with new colleagues that require different things of you. Just think about Alan Watts' statement there. I'm going to refer to Watts once more if we get far enough with this talk. But I also want to talk about the experience of being a weird person. I've been very interested for a long time in the role that culture plays in shaping identity. So and long before I found this really great quote, which is from Henrik here, I was been teaching that culture actually doesn't just shape our identities, it shapes our whole our biophysical structures. It shapes, it alters our brains, it alters our hormones and our anatomy and so on. This guy, Henrik, is actually a he studies neurology of some kind. And he's written a couple of very interesting books. this one about the weirdest people, and he says that weird is actually an acronym for Western. Now that doesn't mean, and I know that my audience here is not Western, but we're all infected by the Western education system. So he says it's not Western as in just being born in France or Germany or America or somewhere, but it's actually Western in terms of our basic cultural orientation now through generations of education, that we are educated, that we're industrialized, we're all in relative terms rich, and we're all committed, I would assume, to democratic ideals. So this sense of this 5 qualities here, or 5 processes, Henrik argues, has shaped the modern world and has laid the foundation for capitalism and for certain forms of appreciation of culture as individualistic, for instance. So individualism is linked to this, that we measure our worth by our money, by our wealth capacity. So in some aspects, he's picking up on Max Weber's concept of, Protestant work ethic and so on. To me, it's just something to be thought about. How has culture shaped our minds and our bodies? And how does it keep shaping that sort of process as we move into the future? And how can we actually bring new forms of consciousness to that shaping? We have to acknowledge, if we take his categories, that weirdness is part of the modern world. But can we change weirdness or challenge it? He's arguing that we can. I found this book somehow hopeful, and I think it was because he recognizes that cultural practices of different kinds, whether they're faith traditions, whether they are practices of communitarianism, whether they are political, economic practices, that they all shape the worlds in which we reside. And to me, if I were to say, what would I like you to walk away with from a session like this, it's with a sense that you have greater capacity and greater agency than you had, or than you previously thought you may have had. So to me, I'm putting this one out there. Go and have a look at that book in your spare time. You don't need to do it now or next week. It's there as something that says, look, culture has these effects. And it has generated this world we live in today, this weird world, but that it is something that is passing. That the world we inhabit today is already historical. The world of tomorrow is emerging, and that we, as people gifted with a Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic vision of the future, but also gifted with a sense of our capacity to bring these elements into different formations than the one that prioritizes or privileges certain forms of domination and certain forms of violence. That's my hope. So I wanted to talk about models here. Here we have an image of Cain killing his brother Abel, a deeply symbolic image from the Bible. But every civilization draws on models of what it means to be human. So we can say that all models enable certain kinds of activity and disable others. Some models are Homo sapiens, that's the model of the wise human. Homo ludens, which was posited by a historian about a century ago now, which is the playful human. Karl Marx, in the hands of some later Marxists, offered us the Homo laborans, the human as the laborer. In a cheeky piece that I wrote over 20 years ago now, called Homo tantricus, I offer the tantric human, drawing on East and West, and drawing on the idea that Tantra is about struggle, drawing on my own spiritual tradition. which is deeply rooted in the tantric sort of Indian paradigm. That one is a live link. So when Nat shares this PowerPoint with you, you can go and look it up. You can see it sitting there. So it's a live link. So I've got Cain and Abel here, a story which I'm assuming all of you are aware of. In the medieval period, thanks to St. Augustine of Hippo particularly, the concept of original sin was definitional of a model of being human. It led to certain religious and spiritual and theological readings of humankind. It also needed to be overthrown in some ways by the Protestantism of this 15th, 16th, 17th century for us to be able to move into what you would call that weird configuration of being human. Indigenous cultures, however, suggest something different again. We are not Homo sapiens, Ludens, Laborans, or Tantricus. We are relational beings. We are beings that are constituted by our relationship with others and not just the human. Neo-humanism, which is a form of humanism which I've been relying on to help me rethink certain aspects of theory, history, and human process for a long time, suggests that we can take elements of Sapiens, Ludens, Laborans, and the Tantric, combine them with the indigenous particularly, to offer an optimistic model of the human being. And it's a model, ultimately, I would say, that is driven by our longing to surpass limits. That longing, in some way, is what is definitional, ultimately, of the human. Longing for the great is what Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar would call it. But when we look at the world around us and we look at our own internal worlds, I would argue that longing, this longing for connection, longing for community, longing for things beyond our own individual isolation is what constitutes being human. It's certainly an aspect, as one of my colleagues has argued in a very wonderful book on the internet and on longing for the great, as she contrasts mediation, using our devices, and meditation. And she uses that throughout this particular text to discuss the challenge that the new information technologies have presented us with. I'm not going to spend much time on that now because I want to keep going, because I'm going to allow us time again to discuss very shortly. So I want to look at what I'm suggesting, though, is that for the challenge of being human today in a world which is so unlike and so surprising in some respects the worlds of the past, that we're facing something completely new, and that means that communication and definitions need to be rethought. I'm very fond of the work of Nora Bateson, whom I quote here from, it was just a blog post, that's why there's nothing, I haven't referenced it, but she says that communication is not what's being said, it's also what's possible to be said, what is possible for us to say. So if I go back one slide to all models enable and disable, well, in every model that we turn to, there are certain possibilities of being said, and there are certain things that are censored or deleted or perhaps just hidden or obscured. And I'm very interested in my own reflections on what is obscured in our relationships with not just humans, but with more than human as well, with animals, plants, the earth, the cosmos. What I would also say in reading Nora Bateson's statement here, where she talks about messages, oops, I did it again, I was going to highlight that word messages, is that messages are models for me. I think if you think of them in those terms, communication is not what has been said, it is what it is possible to say. And that is guarded by the implicit models or messages inherent in the relationships. So over 3 months or so, Nat is fostering a set of relationships amongst and between you, but also between him and those like myself whom he invites in here, there are always, or we always encounter the self-censoring that goes on. But we can also encounter something else, and it's what is on the periphery of our vision. It's what we might have a hunch about or an inkling about, but we can't yet put our fingers on. I very much appreciate and value that space. It's a space where we can tell stories of becoming. Okay? So at the same time, it helps us understand why it's so difficult to talk to a Putin or somebody like that. Or as I give in my example here, this is why climate scientists can't necessarily talk to fundamental Christians and so on. It's because we have different models, and those models act as sense-making domains. Yeah. So what's my model? I'm going to give you my model, and then we're going to move on to, I'm just going to check because I know, yes, task 3 is the next point. So for me, my model is transcultural. My cultural roots, as I've already told you in my little reflection of my own biography, are Christian. There's a Christian humanism there. I studied up until my honours year, which was a study of religious toleration within the Christian tradition of Protestantism, particularly in the 16th century. I was studying Christian theology, Christian epistemology, you could say. At the same time, coming in the back door was this Indian Vedic Buddhist evolutionary cosmology that was starting to infiltrate my thinking. I could say, and I haven't brought it up here, that I was also looking at Sufism within the Islamic tradition, and also the sort of kind of Zen Buddhist thinking of David Suzuki and people like that. So I was becoming eclectic, but I was still coming out of very much a Christian paradigm. I was also, because I was good at it when I was a student, you know, as interested in science and secular science and what evolution has told us and can tell us about ourselves and about cultural projects. I don't see culture as being something beyond evolution. I see culture as deeply evolutionary, but I also see it as tantric in the sense that evolution is about consciousness growing, that human struggles we experience individually, we can experience them with our community and collectively. But ultimately, at a cosmic level, something else is happening that's evolutionary and that we can't necessarily put our fingers on. I see some of that through the Indigenous lens. I've spent a lot of time engaging with Indigenous thinking and philosophy from my undergraduate period, but particularly in the first decade out from university. And of course, I live in a country, Australia, where the Indigenous presence is there and present all the time, even though white Western blinkers might sort of seek to suppress that. And finally, as I talked about just earlier, neo-humanism, okay, it favors emergence. It trusts process. It's a kind of faith in the cosmic process, you could say. It challenges our thinking about limits, our longing to overcome limits or to engage with our limits is actually more a subjective than it is an objective thing. So this is kind of like it's a shorthand sort of set of notes about how I see my model and where my model might be situated. I was thinking to do breakout room, but because there is such a small number, we can stay together. I now am going to invite you to think about a possible model that might work for you. You don't have to answer it. It's more about exploring it. I'm going to do what I did before. I'm going to set my timer up and I'll give you 5 minutes just to start sketching a preliminary model. For some of you, it might be quite well formed. For others, it might be very, very obscure and diffuse and unclear. I'm not expecting answers in any way. What I'm doing is inviting you to explore what might be a model. I will turn back to this slide where you can see how I laid out my model. It's only partial. I could go on adding to all day type thing. But obviously, that's not the point. The point is to start thinking about how do I see the world in a way that it makes it more meaningful, helps me celebrate the richness of the world, and so on. Are there any questions that you want to ask before I hit my 5-minute button again on my phone? You all happy with that? Thumbs up? Yes? Well, happy might not be the right word, but it might be quite challenging. But, you know, I wish you luck. I'm going to grab my phone and I will set it up. Off we go. 5 minutes. Okay, so that's 5 minutes up. So not enough time. I understand that. I appreciate that. But just to get things going a little bit. And these are things that I think, you know, I'm thinking about this all the time. You know, it's something that I haven't stopped thinking about for 50 years or so, probably, something ridiculous like that. It's one of the good things about being old is that you've got a long memory. One of the bad things about being old is that you get a sore back sometimes. That's sort of the way of it. But, you know, this task of thinking about what it means to be human and what kind is helped by thinking about our models. That's basically bottom line for me. So if I scroll down there now, so you can all see that, that's task 3. We've only got one more task to do, and I'm watching the time, and I think we're doing okay. Am I right? Are we doing okay, or are we not? And that says we're doing okay. So we've got about 30 more minutes, something like that, to work with. Is that right? I need to check, so I don't want to kill you with my enthusiasm, because I get very enthusiastic and I forget about time.
Usually finishes by 11. Maybe you can go to 11:15.
Okay, so what's the time now for you, not me?
Okay, for me it is 10:55.
10:55. Okay, so I've got a little less time than I thought. So what I might do is I might just invite. Most of you have spoken, but I don't think Aaron has spoken in the past. Aaron, do you mind me going directly to you and saying, can you tell us what some aspects of your model, just so that we get a sense of where we're going, and then we can move on and try and finish up on time?
Okay. Yes. For me, in my in earlier times, I mean, my schooling days, it was basically this very ethnic based political paradigm that was the dominant influence of my thinking, and overlapping that, I think was this very new age ideas of spirituality. I traced that from my mother. My mother was a very liberal-minded person. She was very syncretic in a way of thinking. So for the earliest period, I mean, from a child to a teenager, it was the syncretism of cultural ideas, mainly cultural and spiritual ideas, mainly from India, and the politics of the time, which is still which is still the dominant discourse in Malaysia. Yeah, so it was a lot of stereotyping towards other ethnicities, and yeah, it was basically colonialism in the as continued by colonial-minded native politicians. Yeah, and then when I finished high school, I read a lot of stuff that related to the larger political, economic, and social context of the time. This was this is situated in after the prime mortgage bubble in America of if I'm not mistaken, 2008. This was when Obama just started his first term as the president of the United States of America. The discourse at that time was a lot of critique towards the financial capitalist system. So yeah, that is what really became my so to speak method of analysis. So it was pretty much again a syncretism of anarchistic ideas of Mikhail Bukhanin and a bit of Marx. Yeah, I wouldn't consider myself a Leninist in the traditional sense. Yeah, and right now it's basically more of looking back at. I become like a neo hippie. A bit of like a neo. I don't know whether this term exists. Yeah, but yeah, you could say
neo hippie. It's good.
Yeah, neo hippie. Yeah, I'm reading stuff of what was written by people who are in the human potential movement and yeah, but I've never lost that idea of critiquing things that are political and that are of political economic nature. Yeah, that's how I would frame my my ideological odyssey, Prof. Bussey.
Thank you. I mean, that's terrific. And what I'm hearing from that is that even though they're totally different forms, each one was questioning the realities around you at the time. So, I'm thinking of your mum and that new age stuff when you were a child, and the ethnic, that they were in tension, so they were problematizing one another. Then there's you must have been a troubled teenager if you're reading Buchanan and Marx and stuff. So that's terrific. And then moving on to now where you've become a neo hippie. So everything but critique and critique for me is fundamentally an attempt to free one's consciousness from the conditioning that's around us right now. Michel Foucault, one of the great French philosophers, said, look, critique is the attempt to be controlled a little less. Okay, so that social dominant narratives that control and shape our existences. Critique is an attempt to free ourselves a little bit more from those narratives. And the point that he was making there is that it's the attempt, that we are never free, of course. We are cultural, historical beings, in bodies, male, female, or transgender, however we want to describe that. We are from different ethnic groups, and so on. But the attempt is there, and this is really part of what it means to start looking at the challenge of being human. So thank you, Aaron. That was a terrific journey or odyssey you just took us on, and it really helps. So moving towards the sort of the end of the session, it's about purposeful action. How do we engage as actors in the world? The challenge of being human and our response to it involves deep emotions, which are rooted in our own biographies. And that's one of the reasons why I point you again at the YouTube clip that I listed in the resources, and that Nat will be sharing with you. Okay. And the point that I want to make is that we are always able to create new conditions. Why? Because as Jamil Zakari points out, we're not static or frozen. Our minds are not static or frozen. Our brains and our minds shift throughout our lives. And I think, Aaron, your story is really helpful in demonstrating that you move from one sort of worldview or one way of looking at the world to another, and then to another. And no doubt by the time you get to my age, you're going to have gone through another 2 or 3 deep shifts in as we sort of craft our own ability to make the world a better place, which of course is fundamentally, I think, what we're all committed to. So I'm not going to do task 4 because of time. I'm just looking at it again. Yep. All right. So the question that I'd like you to think about after this session is, where do we feel most ourselves? Where do we feel disempowered? For many in the West, and this gets to the neoliberal late capitalist trap, when we feel that we can't make the world any better, that the climate change is too big to deal with or whatever, we start thinking about renovating the kitchen. That's a metaphor for we start thinking about what can we affect change with. Do we put solar panels on the roof? Do we start catching the bus instead of driving the car? Do we move into a city so we're closer to the hub of economics, or do we move out of the city so we escape the problems that the city brings to the world, and so on? But this question of how to deal with the world links up to zones of being, and I want to just suggest to you that there's a way, and I use this all the time, the way that we can think about zones of action. There are subjective and objective zones, my own mental framework, but there is a real world. I'm not an idealist. I do believe that there's a real world out there, but I'm a critical realist, in that sense, I guess, if you wanted to use that term, or I'm a pragmatist. And there are individual zones and collective zones, and they can be looked at in this way, that there's an outside world, an external world, which is everything on the right-hand side here, and there's an internal world, everything on the left-hand side. There's an individual world, everything on the top, in the top two quadrants, and there's a collective world, the bottom two quadrants. So here, in this world of the external individual, it's about actions and competencies and skills. But I would say they're leaving something out here. They're leaving out the fact that it's also the external world of external things like climate, like the weather, atoms. It's also about chairs in the classroom or classrooms themselves if you're a teacher. So it's about many things. And those things in the external world are managed by organizations or systems. Some of us are better at managing systems than others. If you're a member of an organized religion, and that religion runs schools, you might be able to have an impact on the organization and resourcing of schools. You might be able to rethink the curriculum and its procedures. You might actually offer some innovation around information itself and metrics. How do we measure good learning? Schools often pay lip service to the fact that we are seeking to make better citizens or better human beings. For me, if we can make a happier human being, we're already making setting the groundwork up for a better future. Because happiness means that we manage to deal to some extent with trauma, for instance. On the individual subjective side, we have the individual, our beliefs and our values and our attitudes. Some of that we've been reflecting upon here. And of course, a lot of what Nat is actually getting you to do is to think about this. But in relation to down here, this is the area of culture. We have systems over here, and we have shared values on this side, sort of the cultural world, the internal and the collective, the norms that shape gender, for instance, our senses of justice and fairness, whether it's ethnically based, like Aaron was suggesting it in his early stages. He was thinking about ethnic justice, for instance. But what about justice for the non-human? To me, I keep coming back to that now. It's almost a mantra for me. What about that which is not at the table? We're discussing being human here, but who's not in the room? Well, it's the animals, it's the plants, it's the air, it's the oxygen, it's the stars, it's the moon and the sun, and so on. This plays out in a very special way. There's a couple more slides. Yeah, that's right. So I'm just checking to make sure I knew where I was up to. It's about empowerment. As I say in the reading that I've just shared with you, institutions reflect our minds, and so the minds of those who create them. If we change our minds, we change the institution, whether it be the church, whether it be the state, whatever. So there is intimate dissent. Also, from the reading, we have this point here. Our psychotic civilization is in fact raging against our containment in the body. Schools can be seen as institutions which seek to subjugate the human body from a very early age. to discipline it. So because we are actually raging against that, I would argue that we are taking this rage out on the planet through violence to the biosphere and its marginalized people. I want you to think about that. Third last slide, a quote from Alan Watts. I want to bring in spirituality because I don't think that we can actually address that inner work without deep spiritual reflection on what it means to be human. Again, Alan Watts points this out. You know, the basic thing, the basic goal of love is to dispel by experiment and experience. Experiment means we have to do things and test things. The illusion that we are separate. We are part of communities, human communities and more than human communities. What does that mean? Well, it means we are better listeners than speakers. It means that we enter into relationship with an open heart, a heart of that's, you know, anchored in a process of love. I don't think whether you're an atheist or a materialist or a deeply religious person that we can access love without an open heart. And I don't see that love is the prerogative of any particular group. Graydon points out that the world that we live in is a deeply relational and deeply connected world. I'm going to skip over that, but there's a link there to that particular little article. I just love it so much. And the last slide. For me, ultimately, the human challenge is to overcome our sense of self as separate. Okay, there are other ways of being and doing, and we have been conditioned to think in terms of separation, but, and to quote from the reading that I was sharing via Nat with you, there is an embodied horizon of possibility. Embodiment for me is about the whole of us as a human being. It draws on that tantric understanding of the mind as embodied, conscious, cognitive, I'm using my words, the aesthetic, the emotional, and the spiritual, and the cosmic. It draws on that sort of continuum, which is why I chose this image of this arc here of a horizon line, but a horizon line that is suggesting that we can all be much more than what we are given to understand by our world today. So that's really all from me. It's an attempt to respond to an impossible question. What is the challenge of being human? It's way beyond any of us, but it is really worth engaging with. I've really engaged with it all my life. My love of history and I really started reading the books in my library when I was 10 or 11. One of the good things about going to a Catholic school, apart from being beaten to hell, was they had a really good library, you know, and I was in there all the time reading biographies and historical accounts of the American War of Independence and whatever. So, you know, with every shadow, there is often something positive to weigh it out the other way. So that's the end from me. I'll hand it back to Nat and Sandra. If you want to facilitate an ongoing short conversation, I'm going to wait around until, you know, you end the session. But Nat, I think it's back to you now. Thank you so much for being very patient with me. And, you know, I really appreciate your kindness in showing up and engaging with my thinking.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. It's been very cool, insightful sharing and sharing your life and your thoughts, your ideas. It's a lot of interesting things, a lot of things connecting with things they have done the last 2 months. Also positioning new things to think about, to work on, to do. So, though I would really like to continue this, I am myself also pressured for time because I have another meeting coming up soon. So, and I have to I do have a little debriefing session before we close. So, but Marcus, this is what I tell most of the people who come to this learning encounters, that we hope that we can interact with you again when in another part of the journey where they think that they should talk to Professor Marcus again, and you could actually come and talk to them again, continue your conversation. And also we have something called the Living Library. And for people above 60, you are qualified to be there.
Yes, that's right.
So I'm going to put you into this Living Library, which also means that they can, we haven't started it, but they can actually decide to have an engagement with you. And then, I can facilitate it, or they now, since they know you, they can facilitate it. And you can then spend longer period with them, provided this timings are organized between them and you. So that could be one way of, engaging with you further on these ideas that you have shared. So thank you so much.
Thank you,
Marcus. Thank you very much for taking the time, the energy to, spend this wonderful 2 hours with us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure, and I'm very happy to be a book in your library, Nat. So I will go, and I'll leave you to do your debrief. All right, and contact me if you wish.
Yeah,
I'm always open to conversation.
Yeah, I will share your materials with them.
Yeah, and I will send this PowerPoint to you right now, Nat, before I finish. Okay, see you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, that's another interesting session that we had, and I think some of this connected with some things which we have been doing, and it's very nice that this come after your very deep sharing yesterday, and I think that it continues this process. This whole month would be something like this when we are talking about rebooting session. And thank you, Aaron, for clarifying your journey. I'm sure many of you all also may see yourself in that way, movement of your own self through various stages, whether you call it models or frameworks or whatever that you think you need to call it, but that's something that gives us an idea who Aaron is and where Aaron is in his own journey. And what we are trying to do here. So now Professor Marcus has shared a number of things which are very interesting concepts. I like this idea of a longing, and I think we all long for peace, we all long for friendship, we all long for love, we all long for a world full of compassion, and the courage to be compassionate. It takes a lot of courage to be compassionate. Just to share with you, in the last 2 years, you had about 300 over ecologists, socio-ecologists who were murdered because they were very much involved with protecting their communities, the forest, the animals there. And stood against powers that wanted that forest, and these people were killed across the board, across whether it's the Latin America or Indonesia or Philippines or India. There were at least about 300 lives that were terminated because they dared to be compassionate in a larger sense to living and non-living, human and non-human lives. So, I think the courage to be compassionate is a very interesting concept, but also a very critical practice that we have to think about and do it in our life. So I think he gave a lot of interesting things, which again, puts the jigsaw puzzle. I hope this fits into one of those jigsaw puzzle that you have. I hope you have in your mind over the last 2 months, and this next couple of weeks when we go through it. So, okay, I will stop here. So we have the next one, by Professor David. He will be doing the part on what you call root skilling. He is going to talk about designing. You see, modeling is designing. The notion of modeling is to putting things together in certain form, but that's the basic process we are doing. Is we always design the world the way we want. So that is a process of designing. Some do it very consciously, some do it very unconsciously, but we are always involved in designing. So there are a lot of ideas of designing that are growing, and now they have regenerative designing as the cutting edge idea of what is designing. So Professor David is into eco designing. He's an eco artist, so he's an artist. So we need to also keep in mind that we need to not really talk to a person like Raymond, who's a quantum physicist. And a quantum physicist, a real quantum physicist, is an artist. You cannot deny that they are artists. Here you have an artist, ecological artist. So he's to share this. So this is part of the root skilling. Root skilling, we have Zen tangling, we had blogging, now we have designing. And then we'll do one or two more. All these are root skilling processes, which skills or competences that you require in order to, engage with the world. So he will share, and please be, he's talking from UK, and his timing and his is also not doing too well. So please be around. That's on Tuesday, right? And on Friday we have a philosopher who will talk about more the basic processes of philosophy. He's not going to talk about philosophical trends and this and that, but the idea of being philosophical. As I told you, he shares a lot of things with children, and he thinks that children can also be philosophical. So he will, and remember that this process of rebooting is also an attempt to become practically philosophical in your own orientation. And we'll go through the process. As we go through the process, you will understand these stages. So I think that's the thing in front of us until we meet on Saturday, which is our own rebooting session. These 2 sessions, please be around, because I know it's a difficult period, and for Amelina in particular, you will have some. But anyway, we'll see how much we can, we'll take a break during that half hour. We'll suggest to them. We'll see how it works. Okay, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the session. I hope you have more things to think. Please, after the first reboot session, there's so many things that are going on. In my mind, in my own being, of how to, use that's tremendously insightful sharing from you all, that pain and the hope. It's not just pain, the hope, and how broken we are, and how we are not also broken. Potential. That whole thing came out so well that first session. I think it's a ground for our continuing discussions on rebooting self. So just keep on. I'm putting it together in some kind of for memory, jogging the memory for those for some of us who have been there too. And then we will take it. We will continue that sharing and discussions, and for our own learning and for our own doing in the future. Okay. You also, if you have something that you want to share from the sharing on the last Saturday, if you have anything that you want to put down into a list or into a comment, or please do that, because this particular part of the journey is very critical also for the program, also for the others reviewers. So it will be good if you have something you can share, whether you can share it separate, in the emails, so all of us learn, or you can put it in your blog or whatever. So just keep that. I have the recording. The recording will be shared with those who are there. I'll do that. Okay. So see you on Tuesday. Okay. Thank you. Take care. I have
Thank
to
you.
rush.
Take care.
I have to rush to another. I have
Thank
to
you,
rush
Dr.
to.
Nat.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.